The year is the 14th century. The air over the Balkans is thick with the stench of ash and fear as the vast Ottoman tide begins to sweep across Serbia, Bulgaria, and Greece. This was more than a military campaign. It was a calculated demolition of Christian society, and the structures holding that society together, the monasteries, were deliberate targets. Imagine the deafening crash as the iron-banded doors of a remote convent are splintered inward, the sound echoing through cloisters where only prayer had reigned before. Nuns, cloistered women whose entire existence was dedicated to the divine, were seized during brutal sieges or dragged from ancient urban sanctuaries that were already being methodically stripped and rededicated as mosques. These were not random acts of opportunistic violence. They were part of a grim, recurring consequence of conquest, a policy of systematic erasure cloaked in the banner of religious dominion. The veil, once a symbol of consecrated dedication, offered no sanctuary against the hardened raiders. Within the logic of expansion, these religious women were categorized not as non-combatants, but as potent ideological trophies, symbols of the very faith the empire sought to supplant. Local chronicles, etched onto fading vellum, whisper of altars defiled and quiet cloisters violently emptied. The aftermath was transport. Young women, often shackled, were absorbed into forced population transfers or sold directly as spoils of war. Age was no defense. The strategic calculus of empire demanded the breaking of a region's spiritual backbone, and that meant the removal, humiliation, or forced absorption of its spiritual protectors. In shadowed regions like Wallachia and Thessaly, entire communities vanished after the Janissaries marched through. Those who offered even silent resistance often faced the lash or the blade. Many more were marched away into the suffocating silence of the empire's slave routes, their identities systematically dismantled. For the captured nun, the terror materialized the moment the lock on her cell was smashed, her vows of chastity now horribly juxtaposed with the binding ropes, her desperate prayers drowned out by the sharp guttural commands of a foreign tongue echoing across sacred ground. Under the sprawling authority of the Ottoman state, the act of converting to Islam was not left to gentle persuasion. It was codified, systematized, and weaponized. For a nun whose selfhood was inextricably woven into her monastic vows, renouncing Christ was not merely a change of allegiance, it was an existential annihilation. This was a political necessity enforced by imperial decree, carried out under the immediate threat of protracted captivity or summary execution. While Ottoman jurisprudence theoretically afforded Christians the status of dhimmi, subjects who survived by paying heavy taxes, this fragile tolerance dissolved rapidly in newly conquered lands, especially when rebellion flared. The refusal of a nun to discard her faith was treated as high treason against the Sultan. Edicts streaming from Istanbul often directly authorized the Islamization of female captives, and abducted nuns were immediately placed in this category. Conversion rarely involved dialogue. Provincial officials, often acting with brutal autonomy, enforced sterile ceremonies of conversion. A forced declaration of the Shahada under duress was often deemed sufficient legal proof. Those who clung fiercely to their beliefs were subjected to escalating tiers of punishment, the sting of the whip, the slow agony of starvation, or total isolation. Their habits were ripped away, they were branded with new foreign names. In some documented cases of extreme resistance, forced circumcisions were brutally enacted, a horrifying tactic employed not for religious necessity, but purely for the sake of absolute degradation and domination over the captive body. The official registers from Istanbul remain eerily silent regarding these agonizing moments, but the chilling aftermath was meticulously preserved in the oral traditions and martyrdom accounts maintained by the surviving Christian communities. Women who once devoted their days to quiet contemplation found their rosaries confiscated, their silence interpreted as defiance, and their bodies subjected to rituals designed to erase their history. To the nun who resisted, conversion was a protracted torment, one where she was forced to repeat alien syllables she couldn't comprehend, watching as the silver cross around her neck was violently torn away and ground into the dust. When her will finally fractured under the combined weight of hunger and pain, her last articulation of Christian belief was smothered by a language not her own. The celebrated Ottoman harem was no mere mythical collection of beautiful women. It was a highly institutionalized system of female servitude, a political engine disguised, superficially, as domesticity. While popular imagination conjures images of silk and concubines of royal lineage, the reality for captured Christian nuns was a descent into absolute control, beginning with the brutal stripping of all identity. Those deemed physically valuable were immediately slotted into the imperial or provincial administrative networks that fed the palace structure. Young women from the Greek, Serbian, or Albanian provinces were especially prized, seen as exotic, unblemished, and inherently obedient. Their past chastity, once sacrosanct, now dramatically amplified their value within a system designed to commodify purity itself. Inside the walls of the harem, the nuns' religious past became an immediate liability. Speaking of Christ, observing fasts, or even clinging to an unseen prayer became capital offenses. Names were overwritten, and entire histories were deliberately scrubbed clean. These women lived under the unblinking watch of palace eunuchs and the harsh oversight of older, fiercely loyal concubines. Defiance, a refusal to adopt Islamic customs, a secret act of prayer, resulted in swift punishment. Beyond the gilded cages of the Sultan's court, countless former nuns were redistributed into the households of powerful provincial elites, pashas, governors, and wealthy merchants, serving as domestic laborers or, inevitably, as concubines. The profound trauma of being forced into intimate proximity with powerful men after a lifetime vowed to sacred celibacy was not an unfortunate byproduct. It was the point. It was the ultimate symbolic subjugation of the Christian spiritual order. For the nun confined within, the reality was daily, regimented obedience spoken in a foreign tongue, her body subject to constant inspection, her enduring silence wrongly interpreted as compliance. The famed Ottoman slave markets functioned as state-sanctioned clearinghouses for human commerce, highly regulated, heavily taxed, and woven directly into the economic fabric of the empire. Christian nuns, once seized, were processed through this machinery with chilling clinical efficiency. In great commercial hubs like Constantinople, Bursa, and Edirne, they were displayed for sale alongside hardened prisoners of war and kidnapped children. Their religious status offered no immunity. Often, it heightened their price. A nun, visibly marked by her demeanor or remnants of her simple garb, was considered a premium commodity, a commodity of rare, supposedly untainted purity. The transaction followed a terrifyingly consistent order. Upon arrival, captives were stripped bare, washed under the gaze of guards, and physically examined. Ottoman slave inspectors, the ketuda, meticulously assessed their age, appearance, and apparent docility, setting their market price accordingly. Resistance was met swiftly with the lash or a gag to ensure silence. These massive markets operated on the twin engines of public exposure and calculated profit, entirely discarding any pretense of modesty.
Surviving 16th and 17th century slave ledgers contain veiled entries such as rum girl, chaste, silent, educated, cryptic shorthand for women who were once nuns. Buyers spanned the spectrum from imperial military officers to regional magnates. Some women were destined for private estates, others disappeared into the shadowed quarters of the cities. A select few entered elite households, but this offered no true safety. Conversion was mandatory. The coerced recitation of the Shahada often occurred right at the point of sale, effectively severing the nun's past life with one required terrifying utterance under threat. Ottoman law granted masters nearly absolute dominion over female property. For the former nun, this translated into a life reduced to grueling domestic labor, sexual servitude, or a devastating combination of both. Punishment for disobedience, a refusal to work, or a slip back into Christian prayer was immediate. Whipping, systematic starvation, or the threat of being sold to a harsher buyer. For the nun standing exposed in the slave pen, the degradation was total and immediate. Her sacred veil torn away, her body scrutinized by jeering strangers in a language she couldn't parse, she witnessed sanctity transformed into cold currency, and obedience forged into the sole mechanism of survival. In shattering these women, the Ottoman system not only inflicted unparalleled personal trauma, but etched a lasting legacy of cultural annihilation, masked beneath the smooth veneer of imperial order. This dark history continues to resonate today in the crumbling ruins of burned sanctuaries, in the forgotten names relegated to hidden chronicles, and in the painful memory of systemic violence that defined the very boundaries of that colossal empire. How do we reconcile the documented brutality against religious women with the sophisticated administration of the era? Share your interpretation of this dark chapter in the comments below. Your perspective helps keep this complex memory alive.